Kia ora. My name is Gavin Hamilton and I'm a trustee of the Lesbian and Gay Archives of New Zealand, Te Pūranga Takatapui o Aotearoa, and I'm very pleased to be able to share our recent experience of using a Transcribathon as a tool for engagement and transformation of our community archive. I've been a trustee of LAGANZ since 1999, and in my professional life I'm a public servant. I work in the publishing field, working with websites, and I've provided some details here of how to reach me if you want to follow up on anything that we cover in today's presentation. Here's what I intend to cover today. I'll explain the format of our Transcribathon quickly before giving some background about the archives and our goals for the Transcribathon as a tool for transformation in three key areas, particularly around community and volunteer engagement and our collection item metadata. I want to show you the key sources that inspired our thinking and planning for the Transcribathon, but I also want to highlight the key factors that we think made our Transcribathon a success. The heart of that success was supporting and encouraging volunteers. Interspersed in my slides are some pointers to some key lessons and ideas in our Transcribathon project, as well as a few of the more successful techniques that we employed. I'm going to conclude with a summary of our key next steps that we're hoping will build on the momentum that the Transcribathon has helped generate for us. So I want to give you a slide early on that helps you visualize the key tool and activity that we're asking volunteers to engage in. What is a Transcribathon? Well, for us, it was a crowdsourcing event over a fortnight in July this year, so about 3 months ago. Volunteers around the country worked online to transcribe and correct the OCR'd text from 4,838 index cards that would have been digitized from our card index catalogue. We got them to use what we think is a fun online tool called fromthepage.com. And through that process, we ran Zoom and drop-in sessions to support and encourage volunteers, as well as using other forms of communication with volunteers. So the key thing to visualize, I guess, with the From the Page tool is that volunteers worked by looking at the image of one of our index cards on the left-hand side. They're able to zoom in, and on the right-hand side there's the original OCR'd text in its untidy state, and they can work in that text editor on the right to correct the characters that they see based on what they can see in the index card. When they've completed that card, they can move on. I'm going to show you quickly in the next slide what a completed card looks like. Here's what a completed and QA'd card looks like. And from the page, you can see that all the text has been condensed onto single lines, aligned completely to the left, and an identifier has been used to retitle the index card. Here's a little bit of background about LAGANZ. Our collecting began with the National Gay Rights Coalition Resource Centre in 1977, and the LAGANZ Charitable Trust in its current form was established in 1992. Our collections are owned by that community trust, and we have an agreement with Alexander Turnbull Library for the housing and provision of access to our physical collections, but that agreement doesn't extend to providing support for our digital collecting, digitization, or digital archive plans. So we have to use our own resources to make progress in the digital collecting sphere. We're a trust run entirely by volunteers, and our focus, as you can see, is on the collection, preservation, and making available for creative use the historical and cultural records of people and groups drawn from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, takatapui, whawhawhine, intersex or queer communities. Our collections span these formats. We are collecting digital materials amongst these formats, but yeah, the primary extent of the collection is physical materials at this stage. The bigger picture or context for the Transcribathon is that, it was a key foundational step for us in our long-term goal to develop a digital archive. It's really important for us to develop good descriptive metadata for our collections and collection items, and ultimately we want to make that data available in an online catalogue for research access. So these are key planks in our strategy for developing a digital archive platform. At the moment, our finding aids are quite widely dispersed. The card catalogue, for example, is located in the ATL in Wellington, so researchers wanting to use that primary kind of resource, describing collection items, need to visit Wellington or have queries carried out for them by our curatorial staff. So where did this idea for the Transcribathon come from? There were a few key influences that helped us settle on the Transcribathon format as a way of unlocking the metadata in our index cards. The Dunedin Public Library's Recollect platform and project to crowdsource the transcription of their handwritten index cards was a key resource for us. Jonathan Hunt is a colleague who's been helping us develop our digital archive plans, and he commended to us two citizen science tools or crowdsourcing tools, Zooniverse and From the Page. So these two particular resources mentioned here really helped inform a lot of our early planning. So it's worth focusing on them in a little bit more detail. Victoria emphasised the importance of setting up microtasks as a way of kind of increasing volunteer satisfaction. Volunteers get a lot of enjoyment, I think, out of being able to complete a task quickly and well. And Siobhan Leachman, who was associated with From the Page, she developed, I think, a fantastic resource. She's a Kiwi and she's expert at setting up crowdsourcing projects. So there's several key points here that she emphasized, and we certainly leveraged a lot of this thinking in our planning and technical setup of the Transcribathon and From the Page. I think a really key point is that, Siobhan emphasized that, a number of kind of super volunteers were going to emerge, and that was certainly true. And we really wanted to kind of support them to become experts at, correcting index cards, but then it meant that we could also extend them to providing some of the QA steps that we needed as well. We did a From the Page pilot with 600 index cards from our posters series, and that allowed us to develop our instructions and From the Page, focus on what the microtasks needed to be, and really kind of explore the features and functionality that From the Page has to offer, and that we're going to support us to work with the end data generated through this process. So what were our goals for the Transcribathon? Well, they were threefold really. As I said, we really wanted to unlock the metadata in those index cards, and crowdsourcing was a way to kind of make that achievable. We were fortunate to get some funding support from the Rainbow Wellbeing Legacy Fund. And another goal was that we wanted to increase community awareness of the archives. We're a Wellington-based archive. It was important to us to start reaching out to regional community groups and alert them that we're interested in collecting both their physical and digital materials. The third objective really was to develop a deeper engagement with volunteers. We think that a project like the Transcribathon can kind of create community well-being by creating connections amongst LGBT people with their history and community, and largely by doing that through a fun, safe and social activity. It was really important to us too to build interest and capability amongst volunteers in working more deeply with our collections and collection metadata. So did we meet our goals for the Transcribathon? Certainly, I think we did. The index cards were completed within 8 days. So that's a whole 6 days earlier than we'd planned for. And it meant that over the following 2 weeks, 15% of the index cards were able to be QA'd by our super volunteers. There's been a lot of interest in our digital archive plans that's been generated by the Transcribathon publicity. And you'll see there that our engagement with volunteers is certainly increasing. Our list of volunteers has grown to 125, and a number of our super volunteers from the Transcribathon are staying involved, and they're ready to help with the metadata mapping exercise of the index card data. Here's a quick overview of how the Transcribathon progressed. It's what you can see there is the number of transcribers that got involved at different stages. As I mentioned, there was sort of an early peak really around launch day, and then there was a concerted effort during the middle weekend to kind of complete the cards. And what it meant was that at first stage, the correction of the cards was sort of completed by the end of the first weekend, which had the effect, I think, of meaning that some of the events that we had planned for the closing weekend needed to shift their focus to sort of celebrating success and sharing a bit more information about the next steps of working with the collection metadata, rather than trying to sort of rouse enthusiasm for a big final push on that final day of the 15-day Transcribathon. A lot of the early work was, on correcting cards was completed early, and then we had a smaller set of volunteers that continued to get involved, doing the really valuable work for us in QAing the cards and standardizing some of the formats of the index cards. Summary here of the different bands of effort that was put in by volunteers. You'll see that around about half of our volunteers did anywhere between 0 and 4 hours of Transcribathon work, but there are a number of super volunteers really that did over 50 hours, which is fairly heroic really. Some of you might be interested in some of the more technical aspects about how we went about setting up the project in From the Page. Our index cards were digitised by New Zealand Micrographic Services. We've got 7 very large PDF files for containing the index card images. We ran an OCR process over those. I used a scripting process to split them into 57 separate PDF files in batches of about 100 cards. And then from the page, we used a single researcher account, which is sufficient to set up one collection that we call the LAGANZ Finding Aids collection, and we use the option to enable OCR correction. Each PDF file is a work or project from the page. That was a nice sort of discrete number that made it easy for us to kind of manage and keep track of the index cards. So the key focus, I think, on making the Transcribathon a success was supporting and encouraging volunteers. We did that by creating an information page about the project early on to provide context and instructions and serve as a one-stop shop for information about what we were needing volunteers to engage with us on. The Zoom sessions were pretty critical, but they're also great fun, I thought. We made them as interactive as we could. It was important to celebrate success and encourage discussion, and I certainly, really enjoyed doing the online demos from the page tool. We got lots of people chipping in with suggestions and sort of letting me know if I'd missed something. It was a lot of fun, and the same was true of the drop-in session that we ran at ATL at an early stage of the Transcribathon. Here's a slide that we used during the opening day Zoom session to set up the demo. We emphasized during the demo that the main thing was to correct and recognize the text. That was the key thing for us. But certainly volunteers did find ways to add value, and in particular adding notes and from the page to alert us to potential kind of issues with what they were seeing on the cards. And we encouraged people to think about getting involved in the QA stage at, if they were feeling keen. We didn't record the opening day and closing day Zoom sessions. That's because not everybody is out in the LGBTI plus communities, and so we wanted to respect people's privacy. But these recorded demos of the correction steps and the QA steps were a way to fill that need. We put a lot of emphasis on supporting volunteers' well-being. It was important that we acknowledged that volunteers might find some of the materials described in our index cards triggering in some way, and we did need to emphasize the importance of maintaining a healthy pace and trying to avoid repetitive strain injury because of the amount of keyboarding that's involved. And the volunteer agreement was a really important tool for us as well in supporting volunteers. It was important to respond to volunteers' queries quickly. It's a way of encouraging them, emboldening them to take on more cards and to feel confident that they're doing a good job. Their queries too helped us refine the instructions through the Transcribathon, and we provided regular progress updates on the webpage to let people know how we were progressing. Here's a slide showing the instructions that were available on each page as people work through the index card. And the notes facility. You can see one of my responses there. This is the QA steps detail. We again focused on microtasks here, and volunteers let us know which ones they were comfortable applying to cards, and we kept track of that so that we could fill the QA gaps ourselves, or save that task for later. We tried to give regular progress updates, what percentage of index cards were being completed. So we found a way to utilize the data from the page to do some of that reporting. Here, I think it's worthwhile focusing on this particular aspect of supporting and encouraging volunteers. We really wanted to develop certain volunteers' interest and curiosity in the collections. We took time to explain bibliographic and cataloguing concepts, and several very keen people wanted to get involved in the QA steps and develop a deeper understanding about how we go about describing collection items. And I think, we're starting to see some rewards for that. There is a committed cohort of volunteers who want to get involved in the metadata mapping stage. We encourage discussion about the way that we index or apply subject terms to the index cards, because we knew that the language we were using, sometimes coming from the 1990s, was potentially going to generate discussion, and we encouraged that. There's another example of how we encourage people to support us in modernising the way we describe collection items. Volunteers' favourite cards. This was a really successful, fun element. We got people to nominate cards that intrigued them, and what we found was that generated a lot of interest and discussion around LGBT IFQ history and the way that we go about managing our collections and providing access and so on. Here's one kind of rather hilarious example. This book, Mr. Madam, Confessions of a Male Madam, is an example of a book that got damaged in the arson attack on the Lesbian and Gay Rights Resource Centre in 1986. So what next for the index cards? The way we plan to kind of build on the momentum from the Transcribathon from here is we're going to be working with the data that's been exported from the page. We'll work in some spreadsheets to map the data to a metadata schema, and ultimately we'll be able to prepare data that we can import into an online catalogue. Here's a view of the exported index card data in text format. So we have 75,000 rows of index card metadata, and we are using this spreadsheet that I've set up in Google Sheets to give volunteers a way of kind of coding and identifying each metadata element so that we can transpose it later into our metadata schema. Sorting the data by the detail allows us to do some pattern matching and makes the process of coding particular elements quicker. We are also going to continue using from the page for some further transcription projects. This one is an index to Pink Triangle magazine from 1979 to the early 1980s. I'd encourage you to take a look if you're interested in seeing how from the page works in practice. The final aspect of kind of building momentum for us really is about investing in the volunteer working groups that we will need to support the development of our digital archive plans, not least certainly in the area of developing our more technical processes, building up our capability in digital archiving practice. And so we're really excited about the interest that the Transcribathon has helped generate amongst the LGBT IFQ communities and amongst our colleagues in the galleries, libraries, archives and museum sector. So I'll end here, I think. Thank you for your interest, and please do get in touch if you have any questions that aren't addressed today. Thank you.